You're listening to the Real Estate Runway podcast, powered by Quattro Capital, where we are all about alternative business and investment strategies to help you amplify life and maximize wealth. Here's your host, the recovering engineer turned multifamily investor, Chad Sutton.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Runway podcast. I'm your host, Chad Sutton, and here we are with the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Mauricio Rauld. Mauricio, how are you doing today?
Good, Chad, man. How you doing? It's great to be on, and thanks for having me.
Doing well, doing well. We've been keeping you busy lately. We've got a couple of deals going with you and about to start one more, so excited to keep working.
You guys are crushing it, man. You're just out there doing the work and finding the deals, and appreciate you guys.
Systems and processes, man. Systems and processes. Well, everyone, Mauricio is with Premier Law Group. He is our syndication attorney of choice, and I really wanted to bring him on to kind of just have some discussions of. I mean, there are some scares that need to happen if you're going to be working with private equity. He can help us with that. And honestly, when you're looking at syndication law, you really need to be talking to a specialist, right? If we're talking about going to get heart surgery, you don't go to a general practitioner, right? It probably won't go well. So I'm going to stop there. Mauricio, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to be in the spot you're in, and then we'll get into some meat, huh?
No, first of all, I love the fact that you started with that. I'll tell you my background real quick, but I love that. And I love the analogy because I use the medical analogy all the time, even for PPMs. And when we get to that point, maybe I'll tell you my little analogy on PPMs, but it's so true. You want to have somebody. People ask me all the time, like, what are the questions I should ask my syndication attorney? And it's like, if you're looking to hire one, I'm like, ask them if this is what they do full time, because there's plenty of people who do this at 20 or 25% of the practice. And this is 100% of my practice. So as you said,
I learned that lesson the hard way, by the way, so we can have that discussion too.
Yeah, for sure. So anyway, I'm a California licensed practicing attorney now for 20, I don't know, I've lost track now, 21, 22 years. Originally from Chile, actually, came over to these States when I was about 15. Educated up at Cal Berkeley here in Northern California, and then law school down here at Loyola in LA. And then I did what all lawyers dream of doing. I went to work for a large law firm down here in Southern California and did a lot of securities work, but also it was really on the litigation side. So I was doing trial work and depositions and all that stuff. Long story short, I knew that's not what I wanted to do full time, and I was super lucky enough for me to meet the realistic guys, which is really the folks that got me out of that rat race. And that all, by the way, happened through Rich Dad. I'm sure your audience has read the Purple
Absolutely.
Book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. I found that book at one point, devoured it. That actually is a funny story. Actually, that book led me to hear Robert Kiyosaki. They do a drop-in for the real estate guys. So he had a drop-in on the radio as I was driving through LA. And I'm like, hey, that's Robert Kiyosaki. That's the guy that I just read his book, and changed my way of thinking. And they were promoting some event here in Southern California, the real estate guys were. So I went to that event, and that changed my life because I ended up working and going in-house general counsel for them. So that got me out of the rat race of the law firm. But I started doing, that's really when I started cutting my teeth on the syndication side. So I did all of their syndications originally as general counsel, and I just started doing my own. And then slowly but surely, I just started taking on clients that were their members. And in 2006, which is now, it's been 15 years now, I started my own firm, Premier Law Group. When you start, you kind of do whatever puts food on the table. But eventually, I narrowed it down to syndication, SEC stuff, and asset protection. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, I just decided to go full-time, all in on syndication. So today, as we mentioned earlier, 100% of my practice is syndications, SEC work, and 99.9% of that is real estate. Multifamily, self-storage, mobile home parks, single family, industrial, retail, whatever, but it's all real estate related. I got a couple of clients that like to do fringe work like cryptocurrency funds or, some crazy things like that. But most of my clients, if not all of my clients, are real estate investors. So that's all I do. Everybody thinks I'm a real estate attorney because of my affiliation with the real estate guys. I am not. I'm the last guy that you want reviewing your PSA and your stuff. We got a partner, Carrie, on the team on that. But this is all I do, day in, day out, is help clients like yourself and help them. The way I like to put it is I just make sure that they're raising the capital in full compliance with federal and state securities laws. A lot of people get caught up in, I need the docs drawn up. And I'm like, whoa. Docs are important, obviously. It's probably one of the cornerstone, but you want somebody to do more than just draft a bunch of documents. I mean, you can get a bunch of documents off the internet, right? It's like, well, what do you put into the documents, number one? but there's so many many landmines. Let's put it that way. There's so many landmines in this securities world that you want somebody who knows them all, doesn't have to go look them up, right? Doesn't have to go research or go into the library. And I know we don't have libraries anymore, but you don't have to research anything. They've kind of got, in my, the way I like to describe it, they've got this little bag of, not bag of tricks, but bag of information in the back of their head. They're constantly accessing. And every so often it's like, whoop, wait a minute. That's an issue that you're bringing up because of A, B, C, D. And if you don't do it full time, you're just not going to know. You're not going to be able to identify the issues when they come up.
I agree completely. And so you said a couple of things there that I just want to hit on, because one of the things is every attorney I work with is also an investor in my space, period, the end. It just works out that way. A specific example where you helped us, Quattro Capital, we had to change the particulars of a deal. I think what was it, 2 or 3 weeks from closing? It was a very short cycle,
Right.
because we brought in a pref equity group, and it turned out to be a good thing. But Mauricio and his team understood how to rewrite the particulars of that deal and how to deal with the commonalities and the common pitfalls that come with working with big money, right? And so had we just gotten someone to draft documents for us, we might have been on our own, and we might have gotten bent over the table, right, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I mean, not only that, I mean, that's a great example of one little thing that's in the bag of tricks, or again, I call it a bag of tricks, not really a bag of trick. It's a bag of information. But that is when you do something like that, which is not totally uncommon. Like you start with plan A and you're going down a route, and then you want to shift and say, wait a minute, I just spoke with this huge investor or private equity group. I want to bring them in. That's all fine, but you've got to recognize that's now a material change. It's a major change in the deal. So now you've got to go back to all the investors that you originally talked to, and they agreed on under a certain set of facts to invest with you. You've got to go back and say, hey, you know what? We're going to bring in a private equity group. They want to have some say in it, or whatever the terms are. We've got to disclose that new information to the prior people that have already written you a check. And we have to give them the chance to get out. I mean, if they don't like the fact that you've got a private equity group, or you don't like the new terms or whatever, you've got to give them that option to back out. And if you don't do that and things go south in the future, that could come back to bite you.
Right. That's right. No one needs a good attorney until things go wrong. Right. That's what you can get by without doing this. No one's checking you on the front end, but when things go wrong, that's when everything gets checked. So Mauricio, what might someone want to consider when they're hiring? You mentioned whether they do this full time or not, but people are looking at their legal team and what they need. Help the audience understand what is the difference in a real estate attorney and a syndication attorney. This is a softball for you. Here you go.
Well, this is the difference between what's the difference between a heart surgeon and a gynecologist, right? I mean, it's completely different. In fact, I actually get calls every so often. I just remember the specific attorney in New York, right in the middle of the pandemic. He called me up, an attorney in New York, pretty well established, and he was starting to advise a client about raising capital, and he was just going to kind of set up an LLC and an operating agreement, something like that. And somehow one of his colleagues or one of his friends brought this idea. Hey, wait a minute, you might be selling securities, and he was like, oh, he had no clue. And so he reached out to me, and I'm like, man, I'm glad I reached out to you, because I really had no idea I just thought I was going to create an LLC with 3 or 4 people, and no big deal. So, and it's not surprising. I mean, if you went to a heart surgeon and had some, and you were pregnant, the heart surgeon would look at you like, I don't know what to do. Let's go talk to an OBGYN. So that's what it is. I mean, the securities laws have to do with registering. You're issuing securities, which means you either have to register these securities or find exemptions and all that stuff. And then a real estate attorney is literally looking at the particular transaction of the deal, sometimes even negotiating the purchase and sale agreement, making sure that's done, negotiating with the lender, pulling all the title reports, any reports that come up, easements or whatever, environmental reports. They're just reviewing all that stuff and making sure you're getting to the finish line of that transaction. My job is to make sure you're raising the money properly and not violating any securities laws. So those are two, and most securities firms don't have, there's two completely separate things. And I think I now understand why, because the real estate has sometimes a whole bunch of issues that pop up that usually don't show up in securities world. But I think we're one of the few that actually have both the securities and the real estate sort of under one roof, which helps us a little bit, because then we're always communicating with each other and it kind of makes it a little bit smoother. But there's a big difference between a securities lawyer and a real estate lawyer and a business lawyer. For example, a business lawyer is just somebody, or a corporate lawyer will be able to help you to create an entity, maybe an LLC, And if you've got multiple partners that can help you draft a properly drafted operating agreement and figure out what all the rules of the partnership are going to be, that doesn't mean that you're complying with the securities laws. And then obviously that's got nothing to do with real estate, potentially nothing to do with real estate. So just like in the medical field, you've got to know, and again, you've got to work, ideally you've got one attorney in your team and kind of helps you with all that stuff, but you can talk to the attorney and say, hey, here's what I need. What kind of lawyer do I need? Because I'm going to tell you right off the bat, it ain't me, right? If you come and tell me we have a business arrangement and we want to come up with a really solid business agreement, I'm not going to do it. So I'm going to refer you to a business attorney or a real estate attorney or, a patent lawyer. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff.
So if someone calls you after a night of partying and they're in jail, don't call Mauricio.
Yeah, and think about that. Like, I used to do all that stuff on the back. I'm not a litigator anymore, right? So if you have a problem with your securities thing or even, your real estate thing, and you want to talk to, somebody who needs to file a lawsuit or defend a lawsuit, that's a litigator. That's a completely different rule thing. And then, of course, forget about criminal versus civil. Like if you get arrested for something, you need a criminal attorney, and within the criminal attorney world, there's different types of specialists. Some people specialize in car accidents and DUIs. Some people, white collar crimes. But so you just need to know at least one lawyer on your team, hopefully, that can then guide you in the right direction and say, hey, this is the type of lawyer they exist, and that's the type of lawyer that you're going to need for your specific situation.
Absolutely. So this is kind of a moving target, right? The rules have evolved. They are evolving. We've all heard about the new 506, and we'll do ish 506C. We've talked about crowdfunding, all that kind of stuff. So what are the different types of syndication routes that someone might take? Most of our listeners are either investors or doing deals, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of important for both an investor and a deal maker to understand what are the different paths that one might be presented with to take, and what are the kind of the benefits and drawbacks of each.
Yeah, so you want to draw it back even further. The first question would be, this comes up a lot too. Is this a securities offering, which is what we think of as a syndication, or is this kind of a joint venture? Is this just kind of a couple people getting together and starting a business and doing it together? So that's going to be the first analysis, and those are two options. You can either do a joint venture or you can do a securities offering. Now, where most people get caught up here, and this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that most beginner syndicators make or whatever, is you don't really get to choose. Hey, I'm going to do a syndication or I'm going to do a joint venture. The way the deal's structured will determine that. Like, you can call it whatever you want, it doesn't matter. So if everyone that's involved, the 4 or 5 people that are involved are actively involved in the deal, everybody's contributing to the returns, everybody's got a role, everybody's contributing money, but you're basically just kind of starting a business, that's probably a joint venture, and that's not a securities offering. So we don't have to worry about the securities laws there, but we've got to make sure everybody's active. The minute you have a couple of passive investors now where the profits are being generated by your efforts, now it's a securities offering. And I don't care if that's a, LLC, a corp, a profit sharing agreement, a TIC agreement, like the structure doesn't matter. It's whether you as the sponsor or one person or a group of people are generating the returns for another passive investor. So if you've got passive investors, you can call it whatever you want. It's a securities offering. Then our analysis so most people end up doing a securities offering because they've got passive investors. That's really what they're looking for. They don't want the investors to come in and be telling them what to do or co-manage. That's not the idea. You want passive. They want their passive. And the investors don't want it. They want to be passive. They want to write you a check, go home, and just collect whatever cash flow you're giving them. Once you are in that world, I always say or joke or however you want to say it, 3 things. 1, register that security. We've got to register that syndication with the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is a federal government agency, or find an exemption to that registration, or it's illegal, right? Register, exemption, illegal. I'll cut to the chase. We live in the exemption world. You don't want to do anything illegal. You rarely ever want to register. So we're always looking for the right exemption. And most people have heard about some of these because they're more popular. This is why you hear things like a 506C, that's a type of exemption, or a 506B as in boy, it's another type of exemption, or a Regulation A, a Reg A, it's another exemption, or crowdfund. Those are all exemptions that we have the option to choose which exemption we want to go with, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And then obviously each exemption has a bunch of requirements, and my job and your job is to make sure, my job is to explain it to you and guide you through it and make sure that you don't violate any of those things in that particular exemption.
Okay. And I guess just to clarify here, when you're saying register, that would be like an IPO, a company going public, costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. You probably don't have to do that in the window, have time to do that in the window of a real estate transaction. So that's out, right?
That's out. It's going to take you 12, 18, 24 months. It's going to cost you 6, 7 figures. And in a real estate transaction, you're probably in contract. You probably need to close in 60, 90 days, maybe 120 days. You don't have time, even if you wanted to. And there's no reason for it too. There's so many exemptions, especially with 506C now, where you can advertise. It almost doesn't make any sense. It's like it's a private exemption, a private placement, but you can advertise. It's even that's not even doesn't make sense. So actually, if you look at the statistics, the IPO market has gone down quite a bit, because it's like, well, why do I need to go public if I can just raise capital by advertising and go basically access the public markets anyway? Most companies go public because at some point you hit a certain amount of investors, of members, that you're required to, like 2,000 investors. You've got to register. You've got to go IPO anyway. Or obviously sometimes people want liquidity, but in general, there's no reason to go public these days because we have all these great exemptions that we can rely on.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about maybe the 1, 2, or maybe there's even 3 exemptions one might choose as a real estate syndicator. What are our options, and why would I choose one or the other?
Well, this is going to be a hint. 95% of people, 95% of the exemptions are either a 506B or a 506C. I mean, those are the 2 most popular. They both fall into these Regulation D kind of umbrella, Reg D. And the reason they're popular is easy. Number one, they preempt state law. So I don't have to worry about the states. I mean, I forget how many different states you guys had in your last deal, but if you had 7
About
different
7, I think.
7, right? So if you have 7 different states, can you imagine having to go higher now? Because I don't do state stuff, right? So I don't know what to do in Colorado. I don't know anything about Colorado securities laws. So you'd have to hire an attorney in Colorado and in California, and wherever those 7 states are, hire somebody, which means cost money. And then you got to figure out your structure so it doesn't violate. You're going to have 7 different statutes, and you got to make sure you're not, it's just a nightmare. So preemption is huge because I don't have to worry about the states, other than obviously anti-fraud provisions. We still can't, rip off investors or do that stuff. But so that's number one. And number 2 is that they're safe harbors. They're literally bullet points that we have. And if you hit all those bullet points, you're basically assured that you're complying with the exemption, which is huge because we don't want uncertainty. We don't want to have to argue in front of a judge or a jury like, oh, this was reasonable or not. These are like very concrete stuff. So 506B within those 2 is by far the most popular. It's the one that's been around the longest. And for some reason, I don't know, 506C hasn't really taken off the way I thought it would. Not as many people are doing it, but it's usually about a 90-10 or actually 92-8 now split between Bs and Cs. But the nice thing about B, and this is the reason most people used it, is you can raise an unlimited amount of money, which is why JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, they use 506B, even though they're raising billions and billions of dollars, right? Blackstone had a $26 billion fund, real estate fund, and it was a 506B because they have broker dealers and they all have relationships, so they don't need to advertise. And that's one of the prohibitions on 506B. So again, unlimited amount of money. You can take some non-accredited investors is probably why it's very popular. So especially if you're just starting out and you want to have your friends and family, inevitably someone's not accredited, meaning they don't have $1 million in net worth, excluding their residence, or they don't make $200,000 or haven't made $200,000 the last couple of years with a reasonable expectation of earning that much this year. So it's nice to have 506B because you can take up to 35 of these non-accredited investors as long as they've got some level of sophistication. So that's, I think, the main reason people like it. And then really the only negative, the only real prohibition is you can't advertise. You can't advertise. You can't generally solicit. So there's no going to these meetups or conferences and renting out a booth and start passing out your business plan. And, hey, call me, I've got a deal. There's no going on social media and announcing to the world that you've got a raise going on and to call you. None of that. Podcast, you can't go on a podcast and talk about, which are all great ways to get new investors, by the way. But you can't do that in a 506B. And that's really the main limitation. But if you have people in your world, you have pre-existing relationships, you have a database, you've got an audience, which is probably the first thing, if you're thinking about doing syndication, that you should work on, is building up that audience in whatever format you can, then 506B works really well.
Yeah. And so really, just speaking to those trying to raise capital, people have to know, like, and trust you, right? And to like and trust you, they have to know you. So what Mauricio is saying, build your audience, get in front of people, get on podcasts, show people what you're doing, become an authority in the space. Otherwise, when you get something under contract, you can't advertise, and all of a sudden you got to raise $2 million, you're going to have a problem, right? Because people are not just going to hand you those checks. All right.
And I
Well,
think, and sorry, Chad, I think that's the reason why 506c hasn't really taken off, because I think people think, oh, I can advertise. Let me go raise $1 million or $2 million online, and then suddenly they don't understand why nobody wrote them a check, and it's because
yeah,
you don't know these people. You don't know, like,
yeah,
and trust these people. That takes time to develop those relationships, whether they're online or not. And
that's
just
right.
pulling up an offering on Facebook doesn't usually generate a check.
No, and I tell you, I haven't invested in any of the Facebook, things that
Right,
I've seen, just general marketing out there,
right,
right? So
right, right,
it's people that I trust that I've invested with.
right.
Well, one more question here, then
Yeah.
we'll get to some personal stuff. So as an investor, and you can talk about this from a syndicated perspective, but I'm envisioning, like, what should I be looking for as an investor? Someone comes to me with an offering and I need to figure out, man, is this compliant or not? Do they have all the right stuff in order? Because, hey, if I go drop 100 grand in this deal and someone gets frustrated later on, reports from the SEC, I've now got risk on me for this whole investment, right? So what
Yeah.
should I be looking for in an offering to make sure that it's kind of compliant?
It also, the number one thing, if you're talking about a passive, if I'm a passive investor and I'm thinking about writing 100,000, 50,000, 200,000 check to someone, is you've got to vet and know the sponsor team. I mean, I can't think, even before you get to the deal or the docs, you've got to vet the sponsor team. You've got to really know whether the sponsor team has the experience, can actually pull off whatever they're alleging they're going to pull off. Do they have a team behind them? Is it just a one-man show who's never done anything before? Or is there a team behind them that are experienced and have done this before? And so you can have a really great deal, but if you have a crappy sponsor, that's not going to work. On the other hand, you could have an average deal, but if you have a really good sponsor, they can pull it off. So I think starting with the sponsor team is critical. Then obviously you want to obviously underwrite and do the vetting on the property itself. But when it comes to documents itself, these are easy red flags. I don't do this anymore, but sometimes clients would send me, they were investing in other deals and then showed me their, hey, can you take a look at these docs so that I can just see if I'm whatever. And number one is, if you are a non-accredited investor, like we talked about before, or that there are non-accredited investors in the deal, there better be a private placement memorandum, a PPM. And a PPM is just a disclosure document that just outlines all the risks involved in the deal, all the ways you can lose your money. It's an awful document. Going to my medical analogy, it's like the medical consent form. Like you go into surgery, I go to
Yeah.
get my teeth pulled, like actually got to go next week again, get your
Mm.
wisdom teeth out, whatever. You go to an oral surgeon. I remember every time I go to the oral surgeon, they give me this sheet, all the ways this little procedure, which is going to take like 5 minutes, could go wrong, right? You can get bleeding, an infection, you could die from this, pulling your wisdom teeth, like all these awful things. You sign that medical consent form, the doctor signs it, boom, and then you do the procedure. That's what a PPM is. It's all the ways you can go wrong, so that you are going into that transaction with eyes wide open. You know exactly what all the risks are, and you're a big girl or a big girl, big boy or a big girl. You can figure out whether that risk is okay for you, because everybody's got a different risk profile. And so there better be a PPM. And if there's not, and there's a story behind why there isn't, that's a red flag. And inevitably, every time I hear some story as to why there's no PPM, it usually means they're cutting corners somewhere. They don't want to hire an attorney, or they just don't know, or they're whatever. And inevitably, they're cutting corners somewhere else. And the two times that egregious thing happened, where there was no PPM, one time there wasn't even a business plan. It was like kind of like an educational piece of material that was just kind of very generic. And it was like, and in both of those cases, they ended up, 2 years later, I got a call from them, and both of them, there was like fraud involved, and they were
Oh,
like, they
wow.
lost all their money. So documentation, if it's not, number one, if it's not even there, is a huge red flag. And then you actually want to read the docs. I mean, there's a reason the docs is that you should read them. But also, a lot of times, the sponsor, maybe the sponsor tells you, or you understand the deal to be a certain way, but if it's not in the docs, it doesn't exist, right? So you may think you're getting XYZ, but if that's not reflected in the documents, or maybe it's reflected in the PPM, but it's not reflected in the operating agreement, if there's a confliction, those are red flags as well. But I think it all starts with the sponsor team, making sure if you've got a good, solid sponsor team that that's experienced, that has a track record, like you guys, it just solves 90% of your problems. They were obviously working with competent counsel in terms of drafting everything. So if there's a really good attorney involved, that will also
Mhm.
mitigate it. But at the end of the day, as a passive investor, the attorney does not represent you. Like, I don't represent your investors. If they have questions about the documents, they want clarifications, I'm happy to talk to them. I'm happy to answer any questions, but it's not my job to tell them whether this is a good deal, a bad deal, or that,
Yeah.
this is just the way it is. And so if you're not comfortable reading the docs, maybe you can go find, what we call an investor representative, and somebody who's got a little bit more experience to review those documents with you, and make sure you understand them, because they are important and they're going to outline all the risks. And it's your job to see whether those risks are justified and the risk reward makes sense to you.
Absolutely. And I love analogies, Mauricio. I mean, going away from the medical field and going to the horse races for a second,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't bet on the horse, you bet on the jockey, right?
Right.
You can have a thoroughbred stallion, but if you've got a 200-pound guy on there where jockey's usually 100 pounds, right?
Right.
And he
Right.
has no experience, he's probably not going to win the race, right? So, or at least,
100%. Great analogy.
yeah.
Yep. Great
Yeah,
analogy.
love it. All right. Well, Mauricio, this has been an action-packed episode. I really appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely.
2 personal questions real quick that I ask everyone. Here we go. Off the cuff. First one, what is your biggest failure in business to date, and what did it teach you? We know all the reasons you're awesome. What's your biggest failure that you'd be willing to comment on?
This is a great question. It actually was a blessing. It's as most failures I think turn out to be a blessing. My biggest failure was 3 years ago. I was a single point failure. The firm was me and me only. And if something were to happen to me, or, whatever, that was a single point failure. I got sick, severely sick for about 6 months, spent a lot of time in the hospital. And that really, clients were great, but just imagine, Chad, you're about to close and you need the docs, and suddenly, Mauricio's in the hospital and you can't get to. I mean, that was a really, and so that was a huge failure on my part. I was out for 6 months, we had no revenue coming in, and so I say it's a blessing, because as I came out from that, you hopefully learn from your mistakes and your failures, and so that's when I immediately started putting together a team together. To now, fast forward 3 years from 3 years now since then, I think I'm at a point where I could disappear for 6 months and everything would be fine. So. But that's being a single point failure, and I actually wrote a book about it. Putting that off, like whether it's a business failure or it's that the living trust or the will that you got to do, and you want to put it off. Get to it now, because if you don't, you never know. You could get hit by a bus tomorrow, and now what?
Absolutely. That is we could do a whole episode on that, on
sure.
Business Building 101, and asking yourself, who can help me do this? Not how do I get it all done?
I'm glad, I think
you have that book?
Aaron was reading that book, and I'm reading it too.
Dan Sullivan, right?
The Dan Sullivan, Who Not How, right? Great book. And he's got a little Cliff Notes version, but get the full book. And guess what? Dan didn't write it, because you want to know who writes the book, not how, right? So he actually didn't even write the book himself. He had somebody write the book with his philosophies. But great book on figuring out. I always say, this is a good point. I know we're going a little bit longer here, but
that's okay.
I always tell people, if you want better answers, you've got to ask better questions, right? Or if you want world-class answers, you've got to ask world-class questions. And so I always told people, your attorneys usually say you can't do this, you can't do that. I always want to ask, well, how do we do this? How do we pull this off? How do we make this happen? What do you want?
Yes.
Let me think how to do it. Now I evolved to the next step, which is like, not how do you do it? Who can I get to do whatever it is that I need to do, especially in the business world, right? Who is that person that can help me do it, as opposed to me rolling up my sleeves myself and getting it done?
That is right. That is a mic drop moment right there. Well, the other thing that I'll ask here, Mauricio, is do you have any philanthropies that you support? We are very pro philanthropy. It's one of our 4 pillars. What can the listeners support on your behalf?
I love Make-A-Wish Foundation. My wife at some point was involved with them. Was a spokesperson for them locally in Chicago. Long story on that too. But and Make-A-Wish is anything that has to do with kids. To me, that kind of pulls at the strings, right? Because anything, I don't know, if you're an adult and you screw things up, whatever, it's your fault. But when you're a kid, you don't really have, and obviously if you're getting sick and stuff. So Make-A-Wish Foundation, I would highly recommend seeking out. If you don't know what that is, they basically, for any terminally ill kids, they have a wish, and it might be, it's usually celebrity related. Maybe they want to go meet Michael Jordan if they're into basketball, or I know you play guitar. Maybe they want to meet Jimmy Page, and they make the arrangements to make that meet and greet, or go to a game, or go front seats at a baseball, whatever it is, whatever that wish is for that child who's terminally ill or something. So that's probably the nearest and dearest to my heart.
I love it. Mauricio, how can people get in touch with you if they need counsel or just want to get to know you better?
Yeah, two ways, I think. If you go to my website, which is premierlawgroup.net, there's a little consultation tab that you can click on there, and that'll get to me. And I actually do all the calls myself. So if you actually want to talk to me, at least now, you can actually get to me, and we can do a little 15-minute call complimentary and help you out however we can. And then check out the YouTube channel. I got Mauricio Rauld. I got a bunch of videos on there. Really, if you found any value in this, if you can go hit a subscribe on that YouTube channel, a bunch of videos there, a bunch more coming. Chad and I were talking before. I haven't done that many in the last probably 6 to 12 months, but there's going to be an avalanche of new stuff on the channel. So I'd appreciate it if you guys check that out. And I think there's a lot of value there for you guys.
Yeah, those are also really good. They're bite-sized and they're impactful. So they're, they're not 2-hour videos.
Right.
Fantastic. Well, Mauricio, this has been fantastic. Thanks for coming on, brother. And we'll continue doing business. Talk soon.
Yeah, always great to see you.
We hope this episode was insightful and brought value to your day. If so, please be awesome and leave us a 5-star review. Find out how Team Quattro can help you at thequattroway.com. Until next time, this is the Real Estate Runway Podcast.